Good evening, everybody. Madam Deputy Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cranston Lecture of 2025. I'm delighted to see you all here this evening. Thank you for coming to support the library and our speakers. If anyone is unfamiliar with the format, just to explain, after our first speaker has presented her paper, there will be an interval of about 20 minutes, during which refreshments will be available at the west end of the church. An exhibition of books from the library will be on display in the chancel. Our second lecture will follow the interval, and the library will then be open to visitors at the end of the evening. The library is located above the vestry, and the entrance is through the chancel behind me. Please take care on your way up and use the ramp and handrails provided. See, we've got our health and safety assessment done there. And now, in the unlikely event of an emergency, the fire exits are located on the four sides of the church. The main door to the west, and the south porch, and the north transept, those are probably the two nearest to the nave, and also through the chancel, somewhere through there, is the east door. Please take a moment to find out which is the nearest exit to you, bearing in mind it might be behind you. And if the alarm does sound, please proceed briskly and calmly through the nearest exit, assembled in the car park of the parish centre opposite. While the lectures are underway, we'd ask you to please switch off your mobile phones and other devices, and respect our speakers by not taking photographs, videos, sound recordings, or such like without permission. Thank you. This evening's lectures are being live streamed on YouTube and will be available for repeat viewing afterwards using the link on the invitation. At the very start of the evening, it's customary for us to give you a brief account of the activities in the library. So, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite our chairman, Hilary Ely, to give you her report for this year, then our first lecture will follow immediately after that. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's Cranston Lecture. To all those here in person, and as is now normal, I'm happy to say, to those joining us online. First, I bring news from the trustees. It is with great sadness that I report the death of our fellow trustee and dear friend, Nicholas Michaelides, on the 2nd of March 2025. Nicholas became a trustee in 2016 and was very active in the areas of insurance, future planning, policy and strategy development, our Sunday openings, and the establishment of a central information resource, an archive of scholarship and knowledge of the library. He will be greatly missed for his personal contribution as a trustee and his encouragement of others. He was determined to continue to contribute even whilst undergoing a long period of ill health, and we honour his courage and his passion for the Cranston Library. We are thankful for Nicholas's energy, his ideas, his generosity, and for our memories of him. A happier task is to welcome two new trustees. Andy Sanford, who has kindly stepped up to introduce tonight's lecture, has been co-opted in the place of Michael Henniker. As chairman of the Holmesdale Natural History Club, he is already highly active in preserving and interpreting the history and heritage of Reigate and its surroundings. Dr. Robin Adams has been co-opted to take Penelope Horsfall's place. She is Senior Research Fellow in the Centre for Editing Lives and Letters, University College London. We're delighted to welcome our two new trustees. We thank them for joining our number, and we look forward to working with them. As you know from my tribute last year, our very energetic and long-standing trustee, Penelope Horsfall, stood down some months ago. We're delighted that she has overcome some health problems to be here tonight, and we hope her recovery will continue swiftly and smoothly. It's a real pleasure to see her with us. 2024 and 25 have been years of gifts to the library, and so it is appropriate that both papers tonight share the common theme of benefaction. I will say very little more about these gifts as they are the subject of the first paper. Andrea Thomas will introduce you to them and talk about their significance. I would like to thank the donors for their generosity and for joining in the long tradition of benefaction that built this library stretching back in time to the subject of the second paper tonight, John Selliard. All the gifts will be on display in our exhibition, so do please take a look if you haven't already done so. Although the library does not have regular opening hours, it receives many visitors by arrangement. And this year we have already welcomed residents from Reigate and elsewhere in Surrey at our occasional Sunday openings and annual Heritage Open Day. We have renewed our links with Reigate Grammar School and assisted several academic researchers. Of particular note is a visit from West Dean College diploma students in book conservation and bookbinding, with their course leader, Victoria Stevens. We opened the library for them, and in the chancel we mounted an exhibition of books representing a range of binding techniques and styles for them to examine more closely. There was great interest in the library as a collection and in the individual examples, and a valuable exchange of knowledge and information. We accepted an invitation for our heritage volunteers and trustees to visit West Dean in May this year to see the work of the students at first hand. It was an exciting and fascinating day. We hope that this is a relationship that can grow and develop. The Cranston Lecture is our annual opportunity to celebrate not just the library, but all the people connected to it who work so hard to keep it alive. Our sincere thanks, as always, go to our heritage volunteers for their care of the books and for making the records of what they contain, and the Art Society Reigate for supporting the project and making their volunteering possible, to St Mary's Parish Office for their support, to the parish teams who are supporting the lecture tonight with sound and vision and with catering, to the friends of the library who support us financially, and to the associates and volunteers who help with setting up and stewarding events. Finally, thanks to all of you for coming this evening and for your valued support to the Cranston Library. You are always so generous with your donations, and we will be very grateful for your gifts tonight. And now I hand back to Andy.
Thank you, Hilary. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening. I'm sure that Andrea Thomas is a familiar figure since she's presented papers at the last 5 Cranston lectures in a row, apparently, exclamation mark, it says here. She's a historian, graduate of the University of Oxford and Edinburgh, serves as our treasurer, and has been a trustee of the library since 2003. Her paper tonight is entitled Bountiful Benevolence, Recent Acquisitions by the Cranston Library. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrea Thomas.
Thank you all very much. Can you all hear me? Yes? Good. Excellent. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the 2025 Cranston Lecture. It's wonderful to see you all here this evening. Thank you for coming, and a special hello to those watching online. For the lecture that follows, I owe huge thanks to Sean Hawkins, Hilary Ely, and one of Hilary's friends, Dr. Sheila Seddon, an academic at the University of York, all of whom have given me invaluable assistance in writing this paper. All the books I will mention in this talk tonight are on display in the exhibition in the chancel behind me, so I would encourage you to have a look at them if you have not already done so. Many of you know the Cranston Library well, and you will be quite aware that we have very little space available, since the shelves housing our remarkable books are almost completely full. Consequently, for many years, it has been the policy of the trustees to accept new books into the collection only in exceptional circumstances. We are very grateful to receive new publications by scholars who have used our books in their research, or volumes which are closely connected to Reigate or to Andrew Cranston. but generally we decline with thanks any new offers of books. However, in the last 2 years, we have received some truly exceptional gifts, which we were surprised and delighted to accept into the library. The books were offered by 2 of our own trustees, Sean Hawkins and Hilary Ely, and by Martin Higgins, who will be known to some of you as the former Historic Buildings Officer of Surrey County Council and a great expert in his field. You may also remember him as a Cranston lecturer in 2010 when he spoke about his ownership and restoration of Betchworth Castle. I shall start my talk tonight with the gift from Sean Hawkins. As I'm sure you know, we often describe the Cranston Library as the first public lending library in England. And we then qualify that remark by saying that we have been unable to identify any other English public lending libraries older than ours. There might be one out there somewhere. But one of the slightly obscure pieces of historical evidence which supports our claim is a parliamentary statute of 1708 to 09. And Sean's recent gift to us is an early printed copy of this very act, which Sean has kindly had bound. The Act for the Better Preservation of Parochial Libraries in that part of Great Britain called England was printed in London in 1709 by the official printers to Queen Anne, Charles Bill, and the widow of the late Thomas Newcombe. It is interesting to note the description of England as part of Great Britain, bearing in mind that the Act of Union between England and Scotland, which created the state of Great Britain, had been passed only the year before, in 1707. And I did speak about that a little bit last year. It was also the case that for legal purposes at this time, the term England encompassed Wales. Grr. The rather hidebound traditions of the Royal Printing Office are clearly visible in the use of black letter type, which by this period was very old-fashioned. As you know, our library was originally founded in March 1701 by the Reverend Andrew Cranston, Vicar of Reigate. In the 1700s, Cranston had been amongst the people calling for legislation to govern the growing number of parochial libraries. He had some correspondence with the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge, the SPCK, on the matter, and in November 1708, a bill was introduced into Parliament. However, by this time, Cranston must have been experiencing some ill health and clearly believed that he could not wait for a national legal framework to be created. So, on the 4th of November 1708, a trust deed established the Cranston Library as a charity in the care of 44 trustees. And on the 11th of December, just a few weeks later, Andrew Cranston died. The Parochial Libraries Act of 1708 was actually passed on the 21st of April 1709. So Cranston's sense of urgency had been justified. Furthermore, the statutory regulations varied somewhat from the arrangements Cranston had made for his library in Reigate. and he may not have been entirely happy with the details of the Act. The very last clause of the Act exempts Cranston's library, and only this library, from its provisions because it was already, quote, constituted in another manner than the libraries provided for in this Act, unquote. The key differences were that it was a lending library rather than a reference collection, open to the general public rather than just the clergy, and under the control of a charitable trust rather than the ecclesiastical authorities. The fact that no other libraries are listed as being given an exemption from the new legislation very strongly suggests that the Cranston Library was in a unique position at the time. So this Act of Parliament is very important for the history of our library. We are therefore extremely grateful that Sean has made this very kind gift to us. The second book I would like to consider tonight is The Gift of Hilary Ely, an early copy of the Icon Basilicae from 1649. I have spoken in several recent lectures about the impact of the civil wars of the 1640s and the execution of King Charles I at Whitehall on the 30th of January 1649, and this book is very closely connected to these events. The title, Icon Basilicae, is a Greek phrase. You can see it right at the very top of the slide. And it means the king's image. And the title page goes on to give an English version. The portraiture of his sacred majesty in his solitudes and sufferings. The book claims to be the words of King Charles himself, written whilst he was imprisoned in Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight, where he was held from November 1647 to December 1648. But the authorship has been a matter of some controversy. The present scholarly consensus is that the book was written largely by John Gordon, the future Bishop of Exeter and later of Worcester, who made use of some authentic writings of the king. It is written in the first person throughout, but uses I or me rather than the royal we that one might expect. It takes the form of a chronological narrative of events from the summoning of the Long Parliament in 1640 to the days leading up to the king's execution, and is presented as a form of advice and encouragement to his eldest son, the future Charles II, in the hope that he will avoid some of his father's mistakes and misfortunes, but nevertheless uphold his principles. In this regard, it imitates the approach of Charles's father, King James VI and I, who wrote a book of advice to his eldest son, Charles's elder brother, Prince Henry Frederick, in 1599, so while he was just King of Scots before he became King of England, which also had a Greek title, Basilikon Doron, the king's gift. As you might imagine, the text of Icon Basilicae takes a very self-justificatory tone, but one designed to present the king in a sympathetic light. He carries his griefs and indignities with fortitude and expresses more sorrow than anger towards his enemies, whom he forgives. He also seems to be anticipating his own imminent death. The narrative is presented in Roman type and is peppered with solemn prayers and pious commentary in italics. A typical passage reads, It is all I have now left me, a power to forgive those that have deprived me of all, and I thank God I have a heart to do it. And joy as much in this grace which God hath given me, as in all my former enjoyments. For this is a greater argument of God's love to me than any prosperity can be. And it goes on in a similar vein. The book was a powerful piece of royalist propaganda at a time when the parliamentary forces were triumphant. Therefore, it was suppressed, which is why the name and location of the printer or publisher is absent from the title page. You would expect to see them towards the bottom where that little coat of arms is. The book tells us simply that it is a reprint rather than a first edition. It refers to some mysterious initials, RM, and gives the date as 1648, which by the calendar conventions of the day means before the 25th of March 1649 in the modern style. The book was produced in quite a small format. If you've already seen it in the exhibition, you can see it's not a big book. And that was, of course, for easy concealment. And it was something of a clandestine bestseller. Copies were surreptitiously on sale from the day of the execution. And by the year's end, it had run to about 35 editions. It was also translated into Latin, French, German, and Dutch, and was published in some 25 editions on the continent. Icon Basilicae contains a beautiful engraved frontispiece which portrays King Charles as a Christian martyr. It was designed and engraved by William Marshall, one of the more prolific engravers of the day, and his name does appear at the very bottom of the picture in Latin, so he wasn't afraid of the association. The imagery is dotted with Latin mottos, but the sense is relatively clear. On the left is a landscape attesting to Charles's steadfastness. He is compared to a rock standing firm whilst buffeted by storms, gales, and high seas. You can see that at the top left. Or a little bit lower, a palm tree growing straight and tall despite being burdened with weights. On the right, we see the king himself in his royal robes, but bareheaded, kneeling before the word of God and gazing heavenwards from where the light of God's grace is falling upon him. There are 3 crowns in the picture. At the bottom, he has discarded the earthly crown labelled vanity, and instead he grasps a crown of thorns labelled grace, representing martyrdom and comparing his death to the sacrifice of Christ, whilst he gazes upwards towards the heavenly crown of glory which awaits him. The idea of presenting Charles as a martyr was so successful that at the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, the day of his execution, 30th of January, was added to the Book of Common Prayer and declared a day of commemoration and fasting. Charles I is still the only saint to be formally canonised by the Church of England. The commemoration was removed from the prayer book by Queen Victoria, but there are still some churches and chapels dedicated to King Charles the Martyr, such as those in Tunbridge Wells, which you may know, and there's one in Potters Bar, one in Falmouth, and there are even a few in America. So Hilary's gift is a fine addition to the other history books in our collection. Finally, I would like to talk about the books gifted to us by Martin Higgins. There are 2 books in 5 volumes, an edition of the works of St. Ambrose, and a collection of sermons by the early church fathers, edited by one Juan Lopez. The story of our new books starts in Dorking, in the middle of the 19th century. In 1850, the Reverend James Joyce, the vicar of St. Martin's Church, died, and his role passed to his son and curate, William Henry Joyce, who served the parish as a vicar for 20 years until his own death in 1870. This photo shows William Henry Joyce seated, along with his sister Laura and her husband, both standing, sometime in the 1860s. The Reverend Joyce seems to have been an active and well-respected clergyman. He had a reputation for working energetically for the welfare of the poor, and during his time, the chancel of St. Martin's Church was rebuilt in its modern form. Indeed, within the pages of one of the new books, we found a letter dated simply April the 20th, with no year. But from reading it, we know that it must have been written in 1868, when the new chancel was inaugurated. This was clearly part of an ongoing correspondence concerning the consecration service for the opening of the new chancel. In the letter, the rector of West Horsley accepts an invitation from the Reverend Joyce to attend on the 30th of April, 1868, and asks if he might bring his curate with him. Letters were obviously delivered very quickly in those days. It's only a few days before the actual event. Mid-Victorian handwriting is not too difficult to decipher, and a transcript is now on the screen. The letter writer, the Reverend Henry Sigismund de Serja, had Swiss ancestry and a slightly wayward manner of spelling. He writes, "Dear Mr. Joyce, nothing unforeseen prevents my doing so. I shall be very glad to attend the opening of your chancel on 30th of April. You were kind enough to ask Mr. Ripley, my curate, whom you saw at Chilworth's ECH meeting, to go also. And unless you have not room for him, he would much like to accompany me. May I bring him? I cannot understand why the Church of St. Martin is to be consecrated. I thought it was the old parish church with an enlarged chancel. Or has the chancel been built on new and unconsecrated ground? A discussion to be continued. I am yours truly, H.S. de Serja." If anyone here knows what the abbreviation ECH stands for, I would be delighted to hear from you. Something ecclesiastical from the context, but I'm afraid it stumped Professor Google. 5 years after the death of the Reverend W.H. Joyce, a stained glass window dedicated to his memory was placed in the south aisle of St. Martin's Church and paid for by his friends and parishioners. But there was another memorial to the Reverend Joyce which concerns us more closely here. Soon after his death, his widow, Mary Isabel Kirsterman Joyce, gave some books in memory of her late husband to the succeeding vicars of the parish of Dorking. The books were a 3-volume edition of the works of St. Ambrose, a 2-volume digest of the sermons of the early church fathers by Juan Lopez, and a 3-volume edition of Farrington's sermons. So 8 volumes in total, and each one inscribed by hand, possibly by Mary Joyce herself. In light of their theological nature, one might well imagine that the books had been collected and used by the late Reverend Joyce. Sadly, there is no surviving trace of the 3 volumes of Farrington's sermons. Anthony Farringdon was a very popular preacher in some quarters in the middle of the 17th century, but he was not in favour with the Cromwellian regime and was hounded by them. His sermons were collected and published after his death. Volume 1 in 1657, Volume 2 in 1663, and Volume 3 in 1674. All of his sermons were then reprinted in a 4-volume edition in 1849, but since Mary Joyce's inscription specifically says that she gave a 3-volume set, it was probably the 17th century editions which have sadly been lost. Although the Cranston Library contains many volumes of sermons, we do not have any of those by Anthony Farringdon. However, intriguingly, we do have 2 books of church history which were donated to the library in 1701 by a man with exactly the same name, recorded as Anthony Farringdon of Lingfield, who was perhaps the son or grandson of the preacher. Who knows? Let's have a look at Mary Joyce's inscription, which appears in largely the same form in each of the books. In this case, this is from one of the Lopez volumes. The handwriting is relatively easy to read. It says, "These 2 volumes, Epitome Sanctorum Patrum by F.J. Lopez, together with Operum Sancti Ambrosiae, 3 volumes, Farringdon's Sermons, 3 volumes, were given to the Vicar of Dorking for the time being in loving memory of the Reverend W.H. Joyce, for 20 years Vicar of this parish, by his widow, Mary Isabel Kirsterman Joyce, St. Luke's Day, 1870. St. Luke's Day is the 18th of October, so only a few days just passed, and in 1870 it was Tuesday. We have no information on how or even if these books were used by the subsequent generations of Dorking parish priests, but they reappeared in the 1990s, lurking in the attic of the old parsonage, which was then in the process of being converted into flats. The workmen on the site, horror of horrors, were intending to dispose of the books in a skip. But they were spotted, yes, I can hear you wincing. They were spotted by Martin Higgins as he was making a site inspection in his professional capacity, and he rescued them from their fate. I wonder if Farringdon's sermons had already gone. Martin obtained permission to keep the books himself and deposited them with his mother, Beryl Higgins, who was herself a distinguished architect and an expert on historic buildings. She died a few years ago, which prompted Martin to offer the books to the Cranston Library. The Ambrose and Lopez volumes, both of which were part of Mary Joyce's gift, are so unusual and so much in keeping with the spirit of Andrew Cranston's collection that we have decided to make room for them on our shelves. We feel sure that if Andrew Cranston had been presented with these books in his time, he would have been delighted to take them into the library, so we should do so now on his behalf. Let's examine the books more closely. First, the Ambrose volumes. St. Ambrose of Milan was one of the 4 Latin doctors of the early church, so his writings are of fundamental importance to Christians. The other 3 were St. Jerome, Augustine of Hippo, and Gregory the Great. The Cranston Library already holds copies of the works of the other 3. We have some volumes, but not the complete set, of Erasmus's edition of the works of Jerome, which once belonged to Andrew Cranston. We have a full 13-volume set of the works of Augustine from the 18th century, alongside other editions of his writings, 2 volumes of which also belonged to Andrew Cranston. And we have 2 16th century editions of Gregory's writings. So the acquisition of this 3-volume edition of the works of St. Ambrose neatly fills a little gap in our collection. St Ambrose was born around about 340 AD to a Roman Christian family, and he died in 397. He was the Bishop of Milan from 374 until his death, and remarkably had not even been baptized, let alone ordained, at the time of his appointment, which was by popular acclamation. The crowd just called for him to be the bishop. However, he had been very well educated, so he was swiftly baptized and ordained and picked up the episcopal threads successfully. He became a prolific author of biblical commentaries, moral and theological tracts, letters, sermons, and Latin hymns. He is the patron saint of Milan and of Bologna, of beekeepers, students, bishops, and beggars. Quite what they all have in common, I'm not sure. And his feast day is the 7th of December. He was buried in the crypt of his cathedral in Milan, which was rededicated as the Basilica of Sant'Ambrogio in his honour. Some of you may have been there. It's a beautiful building. He was extremely influential in the doctrinal disputes of the day, particularly in countering the Arian heresy, and he was a close advisor and critic of several emperors. He is perhaps most famous as the man who baptized Augustine of Hippo in 387 and advised him that, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, on the matter of local liturgical and ritual practices. This 3-volume edition of the works of St Ambrose was published in Basel in 1516 in the well-established workshop of Adam Petri, and was commissioned by Johann Koberger of Nuremberg. It is an old and rare edition, with only 8 other copies currently recorded in British libraries, not all of which have the full 3 volumes. The title page was designed and engraved by the Basel artist Urs Graf, and his initials, VG, appear at the base of the column in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you're wondering, at this period, a U and a V were interchangeable. The base of the opposite column has the date, 1516, in Arabic numerals, and then the same date appears in Roman numerals in the main title. Graf sets the title within a beautiful Renaissance border containing columns, cherubs, scrollwork, and lots of other decoration. The Latin title tells us that the volumes include the complete works, most carefully revised and most neatly set out in 3 parts and arranged alphabetically, along with a life of St Ambrose elegantly written. The bindings are of calf, which looks like it might well be original, and they still have their metal clasps. The bindings have a punched decoration in a lattice framework, including, amongst other things, roses, lilies, and the sacred monograms of Jesus, Mary, and I think St John. I'm not entirely sure about that one. Apologies, they're not really clear on this photograph, but as I say, the real thing is in the Chancellor exhibition. Within the second Ambrose volume is an intriguing Latin inscription indicating early ownership. The sense is still not entirely clear, but Dr. Seddon of York has come up with the best interpretation, which you can now see on the screen. Liber domus Wintancastri procella sancti Eudoci vredic. Or in English, the book of the House of Winchester for the cell of St Judoc, the peaceful or in peace. One of the many monastic houses within medieval Winchester, the new minster, later known as Hyde Abbey, held the relics of St Judoc, a rather obscure Breton priest and hermit of the 7th century, whose name has many variants, including, in English, Jos, or Joyce, which coincidentally was the surname of our Victorian clergyman. This book seems to have been associated with the shrine of St Judoc in some way. Since the book was published in 1516 and the abbey was dissolved in 1538, the inscription must date from some time during that 22-year period. The last word of the inscription is in Dutch rather than Latin, so perhaps the book was given to Hyde Abbey by a Dutch donor, or perhaps it was given by Hyde Abbey to a Dutch site where St Judoc was venerated. Whatever the case, the book does not seem to have travelled very far, because Dorking was still within the Diocese of Winchester in 1870 when Mary Joyce made her gift. Next, we have the Lopez, which contains all 4 of the original books bound together in 2 volumes. Although this is a younger work, printed in Antwerp in 1622, we have been unable to find a record of any other copies held in British libraries, so it is rare in this country. However, there are copies in quite a few continental collections. The title page, again in Latin, tells us that this is a digest of the sermons by the Holy Fathers, and it then lists the saints whose works are contained therein, namely Origen, Basil, John Chrysostom, Jerome, Augustine, Ambrose, Gregory, and Bernard. Furthermore, it tells us that this latest edition has been revised by the author and enlarged and improved over previous ones, and has 2 indexes, one by subject and the other of scriptural references. The previous editions mentioned were published in 1601, 05, 07, and 1614, so this is the 5th edition of a relatively popular work at the time. The author was a Spanish scholar serving as a bishop in Italy at the Diocese of Monopoli on the southern Adriatic coast. His name was Juan, or Johannes, as the Latin has it, or John, as we would say, Lopez. He was a brother of the Dominican order, also known as the Friar's Preacher, and he seems to have had a remarkably long life. His date of birth is not absolutely certain, but is usually given as 1524, and he died in 1632, apparently at the age of 108. He was an ordained priest within the Order of Preachers, but was appointed as a bishop only in 1595, when he would have been already 70 or 71 years old, and he retired from his episcopal duties at the age of 84. Like the Ambrose, his collection of early sermons sits very well with the other similar works in the Cranston Library. The Lopez volumes were printed in Antwerp, which was a major centre of the book trade at the time, and within the Catholic heartlands of the Spanish Netherlands. The printer was Jan van Keerbergen, who was active in the Antwerp book trade from the 1580s to the 1620s. His very elaborate early Baroque printer's device was used in our volumes and many others. It includes horns of plenty, swags of fruit, and an allegorical figure within a sunburst illuminating planet Earth, which is wreathed in laurels. The motto tells us that Keerbergen intended his work to nurture and to adorn the world. The motto is around the head. The bindings are of parchment and are likely to be original, and again have retained their metal clasps. The decoration includes borders of foliage and a gilt coat of arms in the centre, which probably indicates a previous owner, so far unidentified. But there is a crown or a coronet over the coat of arms, so someone very high status. Inside, there are ownership marks, indicating that these books once belonged to the library of the Benedictine monastery of Kremsmünster in Austria, lying between Linz and Salzburg. The inscription reads, Bibliothecae Academiae Cremifanensis, which is the Latin version of Kremsmünster. The library at Kremsmünster is now a magnificent Baroque creation, and the monastery is still a major centre of education and learning. However, I don't think the coat of arms on the binding matches that of the monastery, so the volumes quite possibly had several different owners before they found their way here. No doubt we shall discover much more about our exciting new acquisitions in due course. But for now, I hope you will enjoy viewing and learning about these volumes, newly added to the Cranston Library in 2024 and 2025. And again, I would like to emphasise our huge gratitude to the donors. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. There will now be a short break. There are refreshments over the back, and the exhibition is open again. For the protection of the books, please don't take food and drink into the exhibition area. Please don't handle the books themselves. We've got stewards who, if you want to open some more pages, will do that for you. Can I just now ask you to return to your seats in 20 minutes' time at 22. Thank you very much. Right. Are we all settled in? Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our second speaker this evening, Hilary Ely, who is an Oxford graduate in modern languages and a retired chartered librarian. As she knows, she's also chairman of the Library Trustees and has been a trustee since 1992. And she knows the library inside out, obviously. Her talk tonight is entitled, In All 113 Volumes, Great and Small, John Selliard and His Gift to Reigate Public Library. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hilary Ely.
Tonight I want to introduce you to an unsung hero of Annual Cranston's Reigate Public Library, John Selliard. There are few shelves in the library where his name is not lying hidden. Next to Andrew Cranston's own contribution of nearly 200 books, John Sellard's gift of over 120 books, most of them given at or around the foundation of the library, must have ensured that from the start the collection would make an impression. His generosity far outstripped any of the others of the 300-plus donors whose books built the library. But apart from this achievement, John Sellard led a life of obscurity and has left hardly any trace in the public record. John Sellard of Pendle, Esquire, was lord of one of the manors that made up the parish of Bletchingley. Now regarded as a village, Bletchingley, with its castle, borough, parliamentary history and royal and aristocratic connections, had significance from the early medieval period as an important town in Surrey. John Sellard was the son of Thomas Sellard of Salmons, Penshurst in Kent, and Mary Holman, daughter and ultimately heir of Robert Holman of Pendle, Bletchingley. The Sellards were a sprawling Kentish family with branches in Chiddingstone, Hever, Edenbridge and Braisted, as well as Penshurst. Landed gentry in the main, the family had a tenuous connection to aristocracy in the short-lived baronetcy of Sellard of Delaware in Braisted. The Holman family acquired the manor of Pendle on the northwestern edge of Bletchingley in the early 17th century. George Holman, with family roots in Godstone and a fortune made as a grocer in the City of London, he is also described as a perfumer, which is interesting, bought Pendle from William Tyndall in 1617 and built a manor house, Pendle Court, completed in 1624. This handsome house, much altered and extended, is well known today as the Hawthorne School. George Holman did not live to enjoy his manor house for long. Robert Holman inherited it from his father in 1625. Robert's daughter Mary Holman married Thomas Sellard in 1654, uniting two prosperous gentry families. When Mary's three brothers, Theophilus, Robert and George, all died unmarried, it was Thomas and Mary's son John, born in 1662, who became the lord of the manor of Pendle when he inherited it from his mother on her death in 1687. John Sellard matriculated in 1681 at University College, Oxford, and in the same year was admitted to the Inner Temple, like his Holman grandfather and uncle. But there is no evidence of him graduating, being called to the bar, or practicing law. In 1692, Sellard married Margaret, the daughter of Geoffrey Amherst, Esquire, of Riverhead, Kent. The tiny settlement of Pendle boasts not just one, but two substantial houses. Pendle, or Pendle House, built in the 1630s, as well as Pendle Court. Its architect is reputed to be Inigo Jones. The Amherst family leased Pendle for a while, and Geoffrey Amherst Sr. was one of the MPs for Bletchingley in 1689. The family left Bletchingley the year before the marriage on the death of Margaret's grandfather, but in essence, Sellard married the girl next door. Some Amherst family connections were also donors to the library, including Geoffrey Jr., Margaret's brother. His son was the Amherst everyone has heard of, Field Marshal Sir Geoffrey, later Baron Amherst, a towering figure in the military history of the American colonies, thus Margaret's nephew. John Sellard, though probably younger than Andrew Cranston by 10 years or more, was building his life in Bletchingley in the 1680s and 90s, at roughly the same time as Cranston was establishing himself in Reigate. It seems reasonable to speculate on a friendship between the two built around books and shared intellectual interests. that led to Celliard's generous and transformative gift to the fledgling public library in 1701. One of the books recorded as a Celliard donation, Turner's Physico-Theological Discourse on the Divine Being, was in fact a gift from him to Andrew Cranston in 1700, before the library's foundation. This and evidence in the records and in the books themselves point to a cordial relationship and conceivably to Celliard's participation in planning and shaping the library. Cranston founded the library on a specific day, the 14th of March 1701, 1700 old style. The honour of being the first donor went to Thomas Cuddesdon of Woodhatch, who gave an idiosyncratic handful of books, including a fine folio Book of Common Prayer, some tracts of William Penn, and Hobbes's Leviathan. John Celliard does not appear in the record until some days later, when Cranston opened an entry for him in the Register of Benefactors on the 27th of March, 1701, leaving space on 2 leaves to list his books. Cranston also wrote the exact donation date in each book as part of his standard donor inscription, comprising name, status, place of residence, date of donation. Using these records, 35 books arrived on the 25th of March, 4 on the 26th, 15 on the 27th. 27 were added in April, 9 in May. Sometime thereafter, Cranston added a note in the register. This gentleman gave at first in all 113 volumes, great and small, all useful books in their kind. Finally, at the end of the second full-up leaf, he refers the reader to folio 43, where there is a single entry for the 13th of October 1708 in Cranston's hand, and one more entry written by his successor, the Reverend John Bird. After this initial injection of stock for the library shelves, Celliard gave a few books each year for the remainder of Cranston's life. He made one more donation in 1710 after Cranston's death, and then no more. It is worth noting that during Cranston's lifetime, the only handwriting in the Register of Benefactor is Cranston's own, except for the Celliard entry, where Celliard himself added details of books he gave in later years, some with their donation dates in 1703 and 1704. This marks him out from all the other donors, certainly points to a relationship of trust between the two men, and might be more evidence of Celliard's active collaboration with Cranston in developing the library. The respect and gratitude that Cranston felt for this gift is also apparent in his donor inscriptions in the book. An amusing feature is that Cranston evidently struggled with the spelling of Celliard's name, and who wouldn't? There are at least 6 variants in the books, with differing combinations of L's, Y's, and I's. In a few endearing cases, Cranston has corrected the spelling later, possibly after a gentle reminder, who knows. A small number of the inscriptions have an additional note acknowledging the donor's particular generosity, along the lines of, along with many other valuable or excellent books. Some of the books rated a donor inscription in Latin, some in English, and some in both. As with other donors, this is a code I have not cracked yet. Illustrating all these features, misspelling, a correction, and an extended donor inscription in Latin and in English, is Jeremy Taylor's Dr. Dubitantium, or the Rule of Conscience. But the donor inscription that tells us most about Cranston's and Celliard's warm relationship is found in Cudsworth's True Intellectual System of the Universe, which reads, given together with many other very valuable books by John Celliard of Penhill, Esquire, near Reigate, April the 30th, 1701. This worthy gentleman was one of the first and chief encouragers of this pious design. and a reference to the benefactors register. I wish I had found this inscription sooner. A far better title for this paper is right there. It seems to be an easy relationship, with no need for Celliard to be the first in the benefactors book, no need for accolades or special treatment, apart from the honour of writing in the register the details of his gifts. Unlike the other major donor to the library, the Honourable Hugh Hare, who, while living in Betchworth and waiting to inherit an earldom, gave 50 books, Cranston does not feel obliged to describe Celliard as doctissimi, literatissimi, or even ingeniosissimi. Celliard's is a quieter presence in the library. To weigh and measure Celliard's gift, let us start with Cranston's description. 113 volumes, great and small. That number, 113, must be a snapshot, but we do not know at what date it was written. By my reckoning, the eventual total is 122 volumes and 126 titles, if we count those that are bound together. However, like those prehistoric monuments with uncountable stones, I have found that the numbers tend to shift around rather, and so please forgive me that I do not make the totals agree. The following figures come from collating the library hand list and the register of benefactors. One day I will manage to chase down all the discrepancies. Great and small. The breakdown of sizes is as follows: 16 folio, 39 quarto, 52 octavo, 14 duodecimo. 6 of the titles are in our collection of pamphlets and unbound books, and there is some hot stuff in there. All useful books in their kind, using the broad subject categories of the library hand list. The breakdown of subjects is as follows: 64 theology, 20 history, 16 classical literature, 6 science, 4 biography, 4 philosophy, 2 medicine, specifically anatomy, and 1 each of law, topography, and mathematics. Dates. The publication dates of the books range from the 16th to the 18th centuries, as follows: 16th century 12, 1600 to 1649, 57, 1650 to 1699, 49, and the 1700s, just 1. 15 books have the prices written in them, some in Celliard's hand, but the majority in a single hand that is not his. Celliard's gift uncannily tracks the final shape of the whole collection, split almost equally between religious and non-religious works, with theology, divinity, and scripture forming a slender majority and a range of useful knowledge making up the rest. We have no information about Celliard's complete library, how large it was, what he felt he could spare for this pious design, and what he wanted to keep. Was he giving Cranston the run of his shelves? Was he, in Robin Adams' very useful phrase, for which many thanks, decluttering? A look at the range of dates might lead one to think that he was happier to pass on older books, as the minority of books have publication dates in what one might expect to be his book-buying years, say from 1680 onwards. A possible example, depending of course on what was left behind, is a small but choice collection of books on astronomy, astrology, and cosmology, most of them dating from the 16th and early 17th century. He continued to feed books on this subject into the collection for the next few years, and the last book he donated was Gadbury's Ephemerides for 20 years, and when he gave it, it was 10 years out of date, in December 1710. So perhaps the gift collection skewed towards books that belonged to earlier generations, reflecting their interests but not his, along with maybe some books that he read out of duty when he was young and had no wish to return to. I wonder if we see him getting rid of his university texts. Let us now look at the evidence of Celliard as a book owner and collector and his marks of ownership. 3 books have his full signature in them. 2 of them are 1507 and 1508, 2 volumes of the works of Cicero published in Geneva in 1617. One of these books locates Celiard in University College, Oxford in 1683, so it is a reasonable guess that these formed part of his studies. Otherwise, Celiard employed 2 marks of ownership: an elaborate monogram of intertwined J's and S's, generally on the back of the title page, and the initials I for J, S, blind stamped on the book's boards, often separated by a lozenge-shaped arrangement of pierced holes. Some books had one ownership mark, some had the other, and some had both. I have so far found 26 books with JS monograms and 19 books with blind stamped initials, with or without the lozenge pattern. Here are some examples. It's hard to tell possibly on the screen, but we can show you some in the exhibition. The book on the right, Reading's Guide to the Holy City, looks as though he was trying to work out a different style, but he didn't really get anywhere. Stamped initials. Some of these have already appeared on the slides, so I will give you just one example of a book where Celiard has really gone to town: Norris's Practical Discourse on the Divine Subjects. Crook, a description of the body of man, differs from the rest in that the initials are rather messily scored into the leather with a metal point and not neatly stamped. Again, that's not very clear on the slide, but I have got the book on display. One book displays a whole range of provenance evidence. It has stamped initials on the boards, a monogram, an example of John Celiard's handwriting, which is rare because he did not have a regular book annotating habit, and an extended donor inscription. Martin Clifford's Treatise of Humane Reason, 1675. He has written on the flyleaf, a book of great latitude and extensive charity. And as this is a text much of great popularity with free thinkers, that might be significant. And Cranston has written, given with a great multitude of other books by John Celiard, correctly spelt, of Pendle, Esquire. Some of the older books have evidence of earlier ownership, and altogether this looks like a selection from a blended family library built with contributions over time from the Celiard and Holman sides. And perhaps some books purloined, borrowed, or given and not returned. 2 books have different stamped initials on them. So it may have been a family habit. Lloyd on Church Government has the initials TL stamped on the boards. Celiard's mother Mary married again after the death of Thomas Celiard in 1673, the Reverend Thomas Lee, rector of Penshurst. It seems possible that this is one of his books, absorbed into Celiard's collection. Thomas Lee outlived Mary, dying in 1709, and so was still alive when Celiard included this book in his gift to Cranston. Harvey, Anatomical Exercitations, is stamped TS and signed Thomas Celiard. Most of the Celiards I have encountered are called either Thomas or John, so this could be John Celiard's father or his younger brother. My surmise is that this book belonged to his brother, not his father, despite its early date. Partly because they seem to be 2 people who've been taught handwriting by the same person. The monogram of a previous owner is present that does not appear in any other books in our collection and remains a mystery. More books in the collection have the signatures of previous owners, Holman's, Celiard's, and others. Amongst Robert Holman's books are Ovid's works of 1614 and Fern, blazon blazon of gentry, this last one with his name written in it 3 times, one with the date 1623. Geoffrey Holman, Robert's studious brother who attended Sidney Sussex College, Cambridge, and died young, appears in the works of Terentius of 1635. The name of another unidentified Holman is in the poems of Horace of 1611, along with the name Charles Hampton, presumably the Reverend Dr. Charles Hampton, rector of Bletchingley, also an important donor to Cranston's library. Scheibler's Metaphysica has the name of John Sellard's uncle, Theophilus Holman, and the date 1652. Fewer Sellards than Holmans appear in the collection. We have seen one Thomas. Another Thomas Sellyard wrote his name with his book and the date 1649, October the 10th, in Seneca Opera Omnia, Volume 1 of 1636. I am certain that this is John Sellard's father, Thomas. If you look on the title page very carefully, this is the 3rd book with John Sellard's name written in it, along with the date 1683. So it has to be Thomas's son who has used the flyleaf to draft notes for what is shaping up to be a particularly bumptious undergraduate essay. With the title, A Judgment on Seneca, it begins, "This person is more to be liked than his works. Neither his style nor his conceptions are affecting." And ends, "But he, like the Stoic that he was, is too crabbed in his opinions," with many cutting words in between. So that's Seneca told. Names of other early owners in the books appear. Possibly the most exciting finds in this survey of Sellard's gift have been 2 books with connections to Penshurst Place. From the 1550s through the 17th century and beyond, Penshurst Place was a seat of power, the home of the magnificent Sidney family, of Sir Philip Sidney, favourite of the Queen, famed author and military hero, of his brother Robert, who became First Earl of Leicester, and in the next generation, his son Robert, 2nd Earl, with his wife Lady Dorothy Percy and their numerous family. The Sidney family was famed for its learning and for the library at Penshurst Place, the reconstruction of which by Germaine Moore-Kenton, Joseph Black and William Bowen is such a classic case study. This copy of Aristotle's Politics, translated from Greek to Latin by Denis Lambin in 1567, contains the name of Robert Dow, along with the price he paid for it in 1573, 3 and 4pence. Sounds like a lot of money to me. The book is carefully annotated in his beautiful handwriting. Robert Dow, 1553 to 1588, was an Oxford scholar. He was a teacher of penmanship, a tutor in law, a fellow of All Souls, and a music copyist. His claim to fame is the manuscript in Christchurch Library known as the Dow Park Books. This is an essential source for Tudor music by William Byrd, Robert White, and others. One of Dow's penmanship pupils in Oxford was Robert Sidney, later First Earl of Leicester. Dow also contributed verses to an encomium for Sir Philip Sidney after his untimely death in battle. So there is a tenuous line that connects a book of Robert Dow's to Robert Sidney at Penshurst. Though whether Sidney liberated the book while at Oxford or Dow left the book at Penshurst on the visit, we will never know. From the book, it is as clear as day why Dow was sought after as a writing master and music copyist. His work is beautiful. This book is potentially an important find. In Flavius Jovius' famous and memorable works of 1640, we find the names of 2 cousins and some verses in the handwriting of one of them. They are Lady Diana Sidney, one of numerous daughters of Robert, 2nd Earl of Leicester, and Lady Anne Stanhope, born Anne Percy, daughter of the 10th Earl of Northumberland, briefly married until her early death to Philip, Lord Stanhope, later the 2nd Earl of Chesterfield. Two beautiful autumnal Lely young ladies. Diana's mother, Dorothy Percy, was the sister of the Earl of Northumberland, who lived comparatively close by at Petworth. Very little is known of Diana Sidney. She was around 5 years older than her cousin, Anne, and died unmarried at the age of 42 in 1670. Anne Stanhope was married at 18 and died in 1654, aged 20, possibly in childbirth, as she left an infant son who also did not survive. The verse in Lady Anne's hand reads, "Two nymphs that grace the several parts of life, a spotless virgin and a faultless wife, consent in virtue, knit your hearts so fast, that still the knot in spite of all does last. So all we know of what they do above is that they happy are and that they love." I've not managed to trace these lines as having been written by anybody else, so possibly they are Anne Stanhope's own or a joint production. The life history of the cousins pins this inscription to 1652 to 1654, when both families were leading a quiet life in their country seats and trying as hard as possible not to be noticed by the Protectorate. This too is an important find and a potential addition to the list of books associated with the Sidneys and the Penshurst Library. How it found its way from Penshurst Place to Salmon's and the Cellards is so far unknown. I could spend many more hours showing and describing the fascinating contents of Cellard's gift, but I expect you would like to go home at some point. I will finish with two of the great volumes, in fact the two greatest in the library. If you thought our Ogleby atlases were big, these are bigger. They are number 702, a folio Bible of 1572, and the item known to its friends as 980, an extraordinary folio manuscript setting out proofs and arguments for the existence of God and tabulating Protestant Christian doctrine. These two volumes do not have donor inscriptions written in them, and they have only now emerged from this survey as part of the Celliard gift. And there they are, the second and third items on the list in the Register of Benefactors. Described in the register as Queen Elizabeth's Great Bible is the 1572 revised edition of the Bishop's Bible, first published in 1568. The corroboration of Celliard as owner and donor is his monogram, found several pages in. 980 is undoubtedly the greatest enigma in the library in all senses. It has no clear evidence of provenance, at least none that has yet emerged. All we know is what we can deduce from its presence, that someone set out in 1613 to write out an account of belief in God, laying out the arguments according to a carefully designed system, and took 7 years over it. It was completed in 1620, using reams of paper, bundles of quills, and pints of ink, some of which has eaten away at the paper. As a spiritual exercise, it's not wholly unprecedented in its time, but its sheer size marks it out. There is so much more to find out about it, not least the identity of the person who took on and completed this astonishing feat. John Celliard's contributions to the library tailed off at the end of Cranston's life. It is touching to see the inscription written by Cranston in a shaking hand in Gode's Astrometeorologica, the last book to arrive in his lifetime in October 1708, 2 months before he died. Celliard is not on the list of 44 trustees who took on responsibility for the library after Cranston's death. We will never know if the request was made and declined, If so, it would be of a piece with Sellard's desire for a quiet life, possibly a commentary on his pessimism about the library when Cranston was no longer there to lend his energy. One more book arrived in the time of his successor, the Reverend John Bird, and then no more. John Selliard lived on until February 1745, old style, dying at 83. He lived through the period that saw Reigate Public Library decline into neglect, until in 1744, the then Vicar of Reigate, the Reverend William Stead, made a record of the dire state of the library, with only 2 surviving trustees, and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing about it for another 20 years. Sellard's wife died in 1712 at the age of 38. Of their 8 children, 5 daughters and 3 sons, 2 daughters, Margaret and Elizabeth, and 1 son, John, survived him. Sellard's will, dated 1739, contains evidence of a severe reversal of fortune in his later years. John Selliard Jr. lived only another 5 years until 1750. Then, after his widow and 2 very young daughters died, in 1760 Pendle passed to the descendants of his father's younger brother, Thomas. Apart from the record of his exceptional benefaction to Reigate Public Library, John Selliard left very little mark, apart from church wardenship and parish office, in a handful of years. Unlike other figures in the library's history, he did not stand for Parliament in any of the local rotten boroughs, let alone the one he lived next to and that his father-in-law had represented. In his prime in the 1700s, I imagine him rather as a Mr. Bennet-like character, surrounded by a noisy family of growing children, complaining that the horses were wanted on the farm much oftener than he could get them, and retreating into his book room for some peace, though I'm not sure I can see Mr. Bennet parting quite so readily with his books. How I wish we knew more about Sellard's own library and what happened to it after his death. We must find a way to put the word out for this monogram and those stamped initials and see if anybody else has seen them. The official history of Hawthorne School records Selliard simply as the longest-lived lord of the manor of Pendle. I have worried a lot that I have missed something, some magistracy or address to the assizes. I am reassured by Uvedale Lambert's essential parish history of Bletchingley, to which I owe so much in researching the background to this lecture, especially its comprehensive pedigree of Sellards, Amhersts and Holmans. Lambert could not find any achievements either, and he failed even to mention the role Selliard played in Reigate Public Library. But Lambert did point me to Sellard's epitaph as evident that he never wished for anything but a simple country life. Bene latuit, from the Latin of Ovid and borrowed by Descartes. Bene vixit, bene qui latuit. He lives well who lives well hidden. We now know that an important part of John Sellard's life has been hiding in plain sight on the shelves of Andrew Cranston's Reigate Public Library. Today, I have barely skimmed the surface of this gift, which will provide food for Cranston lectures for many years to come. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to offer thanks to our 2 speakers again, and we also a little token to thank them for their contribution. Thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank Richard for the use of the church, Josh for the audio-visual, our team of stewards, the excellent catering team led by Jill Utting, Jean Wind and Victoria Mezzetti, Thank you very much for coming and supporting the library. I'd like to encourage you to make donations and use the gift aid envelopes if you haven't done so already, which I'm sure you have. And I'd like to wish you a safe journey home. The library is now open. Thank you. Good night.